So I spoke briefly the other day about Amber Heard having borderline personality disorder and how I believed that Johnny Depp's team could use this as an absolute slam dunk to defeat Amber Heard in court. Now obviously people with borderline personality disorder are saying how basically that doesn't prove anything and they shouldn't use that in court, and people are saying they would be cruel and stuff and everything. But it is how they would win, and it generally is, in my opinion, the cause for all these problems in the first place. So I thought, who better to explain how borderline personality disorder works and how people would behave than the great Jordan Peterson. And I just so happened to randomly today stumble upon a video clip where he was asked about it and he explains it in detail, which will give you quite a good insight into the disorder. So yeah, let's jump into it, eh?
Tonight, I'd like to ask you about two different psychological disorders. The first being borderline personality disorder. So 2 lectures ago, somebody asked you about it, and you gave a very sparse answer. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it seemed like it was there was too much complexity to just answer it right there and then. And then somebody else also asked you about the same disorder in your Patreon live stream recently. And when they asked you that, you kind of stopped for a moment, and something kind of flicked on in your head, and it seemed like, and you thought for a couple seconds, and then you said, you know what, I don't think that I can answer that right now because it's just too bloody complex. And I was wondering, just like many young men have gravitated towards your lectures, do you think that there's something about this particular disorder that there's something about people with this particular disorder that might gravitate to your insights and your lectures?
Okay. So I would say probably no to the second one, but I could comment more about borderline personality disorder. I think I have enough mental energy to do that tonight. So, technically speaking, it's often considered the female variant of antisocial personality disorder.
There we go. The female variant of antisocial personality disorder. Now, if Johnny Depp had antisocial personality disorder, Amber Heard's team would be crucifying him for having antisocial personality disorder. Obviously, they would use the statistics of how somebody with that personality disorder is far more likely to be violent, in a relationship as well. Slam dunk. Same thing, female version of that. They could totally crush it. If Johnny Depp had that, he would have already lost. He doesn't. It's something that Amber Heard has. Absolute slam dunk. Yeah, crazy, you know. But yeah, we'll keep playing and find out more.
So it's classified in the domain of externalizing disorders, acting out disorders, and I think what happens. We don't understand borderline personality disorder very well. I mean, it's characterized by tremendous impulsivity, radical confusion of identity, and then this pattern of idealization of people with whom the person afflicted with the disorder is associating, with radical idealization of those people and then radical devaluation of them. And then there's another theme that sort of weaves along with it, which is the proclivity of people with borderline personality disorder to presume that they will be abandoned, and then to act in a manner that makes such abandonment virtually certain. And so it's a very complicated disorder, but that, I think...
What he was basically saying there was that people with borderline personality disorder, they will be very abusive in relationships, which means that the person will leave, but they were abusive because they were scared they were going to leave. It's a crazy cycle, but yeah, that's literally what's happening with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard.
I think gets at the crux of it. One of the things that's interesting about people with borderline personality disorder, in my experience, is that they're often quite intelligent. And
Manipulative.
You see in the person with borderline personality disorder something like the waste or the squandering of tremendous potential. They seem capable of thinking through the nature of their problems and analyzing them and discussing it, but not capable whatsoever of implementing any solutions. And
the reason they're generally looking for people to talk to make them feel better, but they're generally looking to feel the victim as well. And the people that I spoke to with borderline personality disorder, when they do go speak to psychologists and things like that as well, in order to get help, I've always asked them if they told the truth. And they always say, no, I didn't tell the truth. I would be way too embarrassed to say all the horrible things that I did. So they didn't tell the truth, so they can't really get the help that they need. They just really want somebody to listen to them because they're always in pain, which is obviously a huge part of the problem as well.
Technically, there's no relationship between IQ and conscientiousness. It's very weird. Because if you read the neuropsychological literature, and you read about the functions of the prefrontal cortex, they're usually conceptualized in intellectual terms. And they're associated with planning and strategizing and so forth. And that's what conscientiousness is planning and strategizing and implementation. But the correlation between IQ and conscientiousness is zero. And so is the correlation between working memory and conscientiousness. Zero. And zero is a very low correlation, right? I mean, really, it's hard to find things in psychology that are correlated at zero. Things tend to be correlated to some degree. They tend to be interrelated. The borderline seems to be able to strategize and to abstract, but not to be able to implement. And so the intellect per se seems to be functional, but it's not embodied in action. So it can be frustrating to be associated with someone who has borderline personality disorder because they can tell you what the problem is and even tell you what the solution might be, but there's no implementation. So maybe something went wrong developmentally. We don't know exactly how these sorts of things come about. The other thing that seems to be characteristic of people with borderline personality disorder is that they remind me very much of people who are 2 years old. And in some manner, like people with borderline personality disorder can have temper tantrums. In fact, they often do. And now and then you see a temper tantrum and they're usually thrown by 2-year-olds, right? Most people grow out of temper tantrums by the time they're about 3. They're very rare at 4, which is a good thing, because if they're still there at 4, that is not a good diagnostic predictor. That's actually a good diagnostic predictor, but it's not the kind that you want. And, it's funny the way that we respond to 2-year-old temper tantrums, because the 2-year-old will throw themselves on the ground and beat their hands and their legs on the floor and scream and yell and turn red or even blue. I saw a child once who was capable of holding his breath during a temper tantrum till he turned blue, which was really an impressive feat. You should try that, right? It's really hard. You really have to work at it. And you see that in adult borderlines. They'll have temper tantrums. And the funny thing is, when a 2-year-old does it, it's like it's a little off-putting. But when an adult does it, it's completely bloody terrifying. And it happens very frequently with borderlines. And so I would also say, to some degree, they didn't get properly socialized between that critical period of development between 2 and 4. And you see the same thing with adult males who grow up to be antisocial. Because a large proportion of adult males who grow up to be antisocial are aggressive as children, as 2-year-olds. And so there's a small proportion of 2-year-olds who are quite aggressive. They'll kick and hit and bite and steal if you put them with other 2-year-olds. It's about 5% of the males, smaller fraction of the females. But most of them are socialized by the time they're 4. But there's a small percentage who aren't, and they tend to stay antisocial, and they tend to turn into long-term offenders. And the critical period for socialization development seems to be between 2 and 4. And it seems to be mediated by pretend play and rough and tumble play and those sorts of mechanisms. And if it isn't instantiated by the age of 4, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't look like it's addressable. Now, there are dialectic behavioral therapies that have been developed for people with borderline personality disorder.
That's quite interesting, actually. So basically, parents have until their kids are 4 years old to basically make them good people that can mix well with others. And if they haven't really taught them to play nice and how to share with others, then generally that child is going to go out and be a bit of a bully, a bit of a dick, and it's going to be another asshole out in the world causing trouble. And yeah, that's one of the main problems that you find with people with borderline personality disorder is, let's say they haven't been diagnosed yet, but you know that they have this disorder. If you go speak to their parents, whether it's borderline personality disorder or narcissistic disorder or any of these kind of disorders that are quite negative and high in narcissism, when you go speak to their parents about it, if you talk to their parents and say, hey, listen, this person, they have this disorder, you might want to take them to a specialist and so on, the parents always react by completely freaking out. And not in a way where they're concerned about their child. They get extremely angry towards you because they think that you're implying that they failed as a parent, because deep down, they kind of have, because they had until 4 to socialize that kid and socialize them properly. And they never did it. And generally, that's how dickheads are born into the world, by not being socialized properly. It's crazy stuff.
Disorder, and they're purported to be successful, but
Okay, thank you. If I may, so the second psychological disorder I wanted to ask you about is psychopathy. So
there we go. Slam dunk for Johnny Depp's team. If they just pay attention to the fact that this is an antisocial disorder, which generally has, which involves high aggression and lots of temper tantrums, extreme temper tantrums, like a toddler would have, hence the pooping in the bed and so on. So yeah, easy way to win, easy way to get a massive slam dunk, and perfect, no? Anyway, I should probably do some work as I'm procrastinating yet again. I'll be back on soon.